She was taken from Africa to Europe, where she was featured in exhibitions. Well, not because they considered her beautiful, but because her heavy hips and curvaceous body were considered astonishing and peculiar. She was exhibited in London and Paris, shows inside a cage. People came to see her because of her heavy hips and curvaceous body, something women today covet. For the years she lived on Earth, she was used as a circus animal, rather than being respected as a human. Welcome to a new episode of Black Afrik Diary, a channel where we talk about Black African history, culture, arts, and civilization. It's a place where you will see the real picture of Black Africa, its stories and the events defining it. Today we will tell you the tragic story of Sarah Baartman, an African woman who was exploited her entire life and even after life. Let's get started. Sarah Baartman was born in the year 1789 in the faraway land of Gamtoos River in the Eastern Cape, which is today modern South Africa. Her parents were ripped away from her at an early age, leaving her to face the harsh world alone. Her mother died when she was a toddler, and her father during her teenage years. These events cast her into a pit of despair and isolation. She had a husband, but a Dutch colonist took him away forever, leaving her heartbroken, and if that wasn't enough, she also lost a child who never had a chance to grow up. Life was cruel to Sarah, and her journey took an even darker turn. Even her tribe was being haunted. The people of her tribe, the Khoi, were facing a difficult time because of wars brought by outsiders, the Dutch colonizers. These battles were like storms that destroyed the Khoi way of life, causing pain and suffering. It was a time of great sadness, as the Khoi people and their ancient culture were almost wiped away. The Khoi tribe's blood ran through her veins, which gifted her with distinct physical traits. But those traits proved to be sources of suffering. She, much like the women of her tribe, had a lighter skin tone and well-developed hips. Since Dutch had been plundering her tribe, she was captured and sold to a white farmer named Pieter Cesar. He took her to Cape Town, where her name changed to Sarah, a small word that sounded like Sarah in the Dutch language. But her new life was far from being a happy one. In the year 1810, something extraordinary happened. Pieter Cesar's brother, Hendrik Cesar, and a doctor came to Cape Town. They looked at Sarah and were fascinated by the things that made her different from them. Yes, her body, especially her private parts and her large hips, triggered the evil desires in them. These were normal in her Khoi tribe, but strange to the European eyes. Hendrik Cesar decided to take Sarah with him to England, promising her good things like wealth, fame, and return home. But those promises turned out to be empty words, and Sarah was caught in a web of lies. She, along with Hendrik Cesar and Dr. Dunlop, boarded a ship that sailed to a faraway land of England. Sadly, this marked the beginning of a very sad chapter in her life. She never saw her home in South Africa again. In England, things were different. The people there had stopped trading slaves across the ocean, but many Black people were still not free. Sarah arrived in a place where some Black folks were getting better lives, but many were still struggling and poor. Hendrik Cesar and Dr. Dunlop had plans to make money from Sarah's body. They wanted to show her to curious people, hoping they would pay to see her. They even tried to sell her to a museum, but they only bought a giraffe's skin from them. Hendrik Cesar didn't give up. He saw a way to make money by showing Sarah to crowds of people who came for different reasons. Some were curious, some were disgusted, and some even had strange thoughts about her. Even though many people wanted to see her, no one really knew how Sarah felt. She must have been sad and scared, but nobody wrote down her feelings. Some writers from that time saw her crying and asking not to be made to dance in front of the audience. She was in pain, but her keeper didn't listen and forced her to perform. She was treated like a wild animal, caged and made to dance and perform whenever the master ordered. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black Africa. Let's continue now. In the year 1810, things took a turn in Sarah Baartman's life. An important person who fought against slavery persuaded a court called the King's Bench to listen to a case about whether Sarah had agreed to come to England and perform, or if she was forced. The man who had been showing her, Cesar, said she had come willingly and even signed a contract. But Sarah never knew about any contract. The contract became her prison, allowing Dunlop and his accomplices to traverse different lands, flaunting Sarah's exposed body like a perverse sideshow. As they reveled in obscene profits, Sarah was subjected to the vilest of displays, paraded around in barely their attire. The public paid to gawk at her, touch her, and treat her like a lifeless object existing solely for their amusement. They reduced her to a pitiful plaything, commanding her every move, each gesture a reminder of her stolen humanity. In the court, could not be understood as the actual words Sarchi said weren't in the court records. They were translated by someone else. Whatever Sarchi said, it was translated and changed and told to the court. When Sarchi said she was captured, brought to England and treated like less than an animal, the person translated them and said Sarchi was happy to be in England and didn't want to go back to South Africa. This testimony and the legal contract, shown earlier, played against Sarchi. But how could anyone with a shred of humanity believe that? Coercion hung heavy in the air, and her shaky command of the English language was a barrier to her plea for freedom. They manipulated her vulnerability and her fear, and twisted her words into a grotesque affirmation of her own exploitation. The court decided in favor of Caesar, but told him to stop inappropriately showing her. However, many historians believe that Sarchi, born in a land controlled by the Dutch, probably didn't truly feel she had a choice or was free. She might have been scared she would be made a slave again if she went back home. After some time, Caesar took Sarchi secretly around Britain and then to Paris when she was around 24. He sold her to someone else, and they never saw each other again. In Paris, people were excited to see her because she was seen as exotic and a sexual object. She was even exhibited with a bear and sometimes taken to parties where rich people paid to see her. During this time, a scientist named George Cuvier became interested in Sarchi. He wanted to study her body, and this was the start of racial science. The horrifying saga of Sarah Baartman, a life ensnared by torment and exploitation, came to a tragic end at the tender age of 26. The cause of her demise was labeled inflammatory and eruptive disease, but her suffering did not end even after her death. Her life was full of agonies, and her death was an extension of the same wretched narrative. Georges Cuvier, the supposed naturalist who in reality was a monster parading as a scholar, decided to study her body. He had once shamelessly danced with Baartman at one of those debauched parties. Now he was ready to cast her body in plaster before proceeding to dissect it. Can you even imagine the cruelty, the callous disregard for her humanity? He dissected her brain and genitals, a dreadful preservation of her very essence, transforming her into a grotesque exhibit for the prying eyes. These sickening jars holding her most intimate parts were put on display at Paris's Museum of Man. For 7 decades, her stolen remains were shown like a ghastly sideshow, a grim reminder of the inhumanity inflicted upon a black woman during her life and beyond the grave. When Nelson Mandela was elected the president of South Africa in 1994, he demanded the repatriation of Sarchi's remains and the plaster cast that embodied her stolen humanity. And what did he face in return? Years of obstinacy, bureaucracy, and indifference from the very government that had subjected her to this grotesque degradation. The French government, the so-called bastion of enlightenment and human rights, dragged their feet, playing a vile game of power and politics, while Sarchi's remains languished in a state of perpetual indignity. This wasn't just a delay. This was a deliberate perpetuation of the same cruelty that had plagued her throughout her life. In March of 2002, almost 2 centuries after her heart-wrenching journey to Europe, her stolen remains were handed back to the land that had birthed her. Isn't it true that Sarah's story exposes what Europeans did to African women? Tell us, how could they muster up the audacity to do things like that? Let us know your thoughts on this. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring videos on Black Africa, its history, rich arts and culture, and things the world should know about. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.